The day I got kicked out, I had exactly $19 in my pocket. Not enough for rent. Not enough for a motel. Barely enough for a few meals. But somehow, by the end of that same week, I owned a house. It just happened to cost $5. And it just happened to almost kill us. I turned 18 on a Monday. By Wednesday, my stepfather had decided I was old enough to figure life out on my own. He didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't even seem angry. He just stood in the doorway holding a trash bag with my clothes stuffed inside. "You're an adult now," he said. Behind him, my younger sister Claire stood in the hallway, staring at the floor. She was 17, and she looked terrified. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not here." The door shut 5 minutes later. Just like that. Claire and I sat on the curb at the end of the driveway for almost half an hour. Neither of us spoke. Cars passed occasionally on the road, tires humming on the asphalt. Finally, Claire said quietly, "He's not coming back out, is he?" "No." She nodded slowly. "Okay." That was the moment everything changed. Our town wasn't big. One gas station, one grocery store, a hardware shop, and a handful of houses scattered around the edges of the valley. Everyone knew everyone, which meant by the time Claire and I walked into town, people were already looking at us with that same expression. The one that says they know something bad happened, but they're not sure how to help. Mrs. Carter at the grocery store gave us 2 sandwiches that were about to expire. The gas station clerk let us fill our water bottles. But nobody offered a place to stay. And honestly, I didn't expect them to. We spent the first night behind the mechanic shop. There was a narrow space between the building and the fence that blocked most of the wind. Claire curled up inside her hoodie while I stayed awake watching the parking lot lights flicker. "You think we'll figure something out?" she asked quietly. "Yeah." "How?" I stared up at the dark sky. "I don't know yet." But I meant it. Because giving up wasn't an option. The next morning we started looking for work, which is harder than you'd think when you're carrying everything you own in a backpack. The hardware store said they weren't hiring. The diner already had too many workers. The farm outside town said they might need help in a few months. By late afternoon, we were back on the same curb outside the town office building. Claire counted the money in my pocket. $19, she said. "Yeah, that's not great." "No." She sighed. "So what now?" I didn't answer right away, because across the street, something had caught my attention. At the edge of town stood a house no one talked about anymore. It sat on a small hill surrounded by tall weeds and broken fencing. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. Rust streaked down the metal gutters. Most of the windows were boarded up. It had once belonged to a man named Walter Brakes. He'd been a mechanic who lived alone and rarely left the property. When he died a few years earlier, the house just stayed there. No one bought it. No one fixed it. People said the place was cursed. Or haunted. We're just falling apart. Claire followed my gaze. "Oh no." "What?" "You're thinking something stupid again." I stood up. "Maybe." The town office smelled like old paper and coffee. A tired woman behind the desk looked up as we walked in. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said. "I want to buy the Briggs house." She blinked. "You're serious?" "Yes." She studied me for a moment, then called toward the back office. "Mr. Halvorsen." A minute later, the town manager stepped out. Halvorsen was tall, gray-haired, and had the permanent expression of someone who had dealt with small-town problems for decades. He looked at Claire, then at me. "You want the Briggs property?" "Yes, sir." He crossed his arms. "Why?" "Because nobody else does." He couldn't argue with that. "The roof leaks," he said. I figured. The wiring's probably shot. "Okay. The foundation might be unstable." I shrugged. "We'll fix it." He studied us for a long moment. "How much money you got?" I placed the bills on the counter. $19. He stared at the money, then laughed. Not cruelly. More like someone who had just heard the most ridiculous proposal of the week. "You know what," he said. "I've been trying to get that property off the town's books for 3 years." He slid $14 back toward me. $5. Claire blinked. "You're serious?" "As long as you sign the liability waiver." 2 hours later, Claire and I owned a house. Standing in front of it for the first time felt surreal. Up close it looked worse than I remembered. The porch leaned slightly to one side. Paint peeled off the wooden siding. Tall grass brushed against the broken fence. Claire folded her arms. "So, we just bought a haunted house." "It's not haunted." "How do you know?" "Because ghosts usually charge more than $5. She rolled her eyes. The front door creaked loudly when we pushed it open. Dust filled the air inside. Sunlight slipped through gaps in the boarded windows. The living room looked frozen in time. Old furniture sat exactly where it had been left. A couch, a small table, a bookshelf filled with tools and manuals. Claire stepped inside slowly. This place is creepy. I nodded. But something else caught my attention. The house looked abandoned, but not destroyed, which meant something. No broken walls. No major damage. Just neglect. The kind that could be fixed. We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring. The kitchen still had working cabinets. The bedrooms had old mattresses covered in dust. The basement stairs creaked but held our weight. And that's when things got strange. Because the basement wasn't empty. Not even close. The room was filled with shelves. Metal shelves. Covered in boxes. Claire stepped closer and opened one. Inside were sealed food containers. Rice. Beans. Canned meat. Another box held medical supplies. Bandages. Antibiotics. Flashlights. Batteries. I walked slowly around the room. There were dozens of boxes. Maybe hundreds. Claire looked at me with wide eyes. What is all this? I didn't answer right away, because in the center of the room sat a thick metal door. A door that definitely hadn't been part of the original house. And suddenly the rusted house didn't look abandoned anymore. Claire and I stood in the basement staring at the metal door. It didn't belong there. Everything else in the house looked old and worn down. The shelves were dusty, the boxes faded with age, and the basement floor had cracks running through the concrete. But the door was different. It was thick steel, bolted directly into the wall. The hinges looked heavy enough to belong on a bank vault, and a large wheel-shaped handle sat in the center. Claire whispered, "Is that a bunker door?" I stepped closer and brushed away a layer of dust. "Looks like it." She folded her arms. "You bought a house with a secret bunker for $5. Technically," I said, "we bought a bunker that came with a house." She shook her head slowly. "Okay, that's weird." I grabbed the handle and tried turning it. At first it didn't move. The metal groaned softly under the pressure. "Maybe it sealed shut," Claire said. "Maybe." I adjusted my grip and pulled harder. The handle suddenly jerked. With a deep metallic creak, the locking mechanism began turning. Claire stepped back. "Wait, it still works?" Apparently it did. The heavy bolts inside the wall slid open one by one with dull thuds. Then the door slowly swung outward. Cold air drifted out of the darkness behind it. Claire leaned forward, peering inside. "Please tell me there's not a skeleton in there." "No skeletons," I said. "At least not yet." The bunker hallway stretched several feet into the ground. Concrete walls lined the sides, reinforced with thick steel beams. A row of battery-powered lights ran along the ceiling. Some of them flickered when I flipped a nearby switch. Others came to life immediately. Claire's eyes widened. "This place has electricity?" "Backup batteries, probably." We stepped inside cautiously. The bunker was bigger than we expected. Much bigger. The hallway opened into a main room roughly the size of the entire basement above. Shelves filled every wall. And every shelf was packed. Food. Water containers. Medical kits. Tools. There were crates stacked from the floor almost to the ceiling. Claire slowly turned in a circle. "Oh my, this is insane." I walked over to one of the shelves and picked up a can. Still sealed. Expiration date nearly 10 years away. Another shelf held boxes of bottled water. Another contained flashlights, radios, and spare batteries. Claire opened a nearby crate. Inside were blankets and winter coats sealed in plastic. "This is like a survival bunker," she said. I nodded. Someone prepared this place for something. Then Claire noticed the table. A small desk sat against the far wall, and on it rested a thick leather notebook. She picked it up. Dust puffed into the air. "Here we go," she said. I walked over beside her. "Find something." She flipped open the first page. The handwriting was neat but slightly faded. Claire read aloud. "If you found this bunker, then things probably didn't go the way I planned." She paused. "That's comforting. Keep reading." The journal belonged to Walter Brakes, the same man who had owned the house before he died. But according to the notebook, he hadn't just been a mechanic. Years earlier, he had worked as an engineer on disaster response projects, storm shelters, emergency systems, infrastructure planning. And after he retired, he built this bunker. Claire flipped another page. He spent almost 10 years building it. Why? She pointed to the next paragraph. I leaned closer to read. Walter believed something big would eventually hit the valley. Not a war. Not an invasion. Something natural. Floods. Wildfires. Severe storms. He had seen enough disasters in his career to know small towns were often the least prepared. So he built the bunker quietly beneath his own house, stocked it with supplies, prepared it to last for months if necessary, maybe even longer. Claire slowly closed the notebook. He built this to save people. Looks like it. For the next few days, Claire and I worked nonstop. The house above still needed serious repairs, but the bunker gave us something we hadn't had in days. Security, food, water, warmth. We cleaned the basement, organized the supplies, checked expiration dates. Some of the food was old, but most of it was still usable. Claire set up a small sleeping area in the bunker, just in case. You know, she said one evening, this might actually work. What might? Living here. I leaned against the wall. Yeah. She smiled slightly. Best $5 purchase ever. 2 weeks later the storm hit. And that's when everything changed. It started with heavy rain. The kind that turns dirt roads into rivers. The news on the old battery radio warned of flash flooding across the valley. But no one expected how fast it would happen. By midnight the river near town had overflowed. Water rushed down the hillsides and into the lower neighborhoods. Claire and I watched from the upstairs window as lightning lit the sky. This looks bad, she said. Then the power went out. The entire town went dark. The rain didn't stop for 12 hours. By morning the roads were flooded. Cars were stranded. Several houses near the creek had water pouring through their doors. People were panicking. And that's when I realized something. The bunker. Walter hadn't built it just for himself. He built it for moments exactly like this. By afternoon, neighbors began knocking on the door. First it was Mrs. Carter from the grocery store. Her house had flooded. Then the mechanic and his wife arrived. Then 2 families from the lower road. Word spread quickly. Walter's bunker, someone said. I heard it's huge. Claire looked at me. Are we really doing this? I nodded. Yeah. We opened the bunker door. And for the first time in years, Walter Brake's survival shelter was finally used for its true purpose. People filled the underground room. Families, kids, neighbors. Wet coats hung along the walls while the storm raged outside. Claire helped hand out blankets while I organized food and water. The bunker lights glowed softly above us. And slowly the panic faded. Because everyone realized the same thing. They were safe. 3 days later the floodwaters finally receded. The town was damaged. But nobody had died. And a big part of that was because of the bunker beneath the rusted $5 house. That evening Claire and I sat on the front porch watching the sun set over the valley. The grass still glistened from the storm. The town lights flickered back on in the distance. Claire leaned back in the chair. You realize something? What? She pointed toward the house. Everyone thought this place was worthless. I looked at the old structure behind us. The peeling paint. The crooked porch. The hidden bunker below. Yeah, I said. And now? Claire smiled. Now it's saved the whole town.